24 ridiculously weird historical facts that are surprisingly true. Heroin was once a perfectly acceptable medicine. Doctors prescribed it for everything from coughs to headaches. Albert Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel on November 17, 1952, following the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann. He declined, saying he lacked the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people, to do the job. Before dentures were invented, teeth were extracted from the mouths of dead soldiers for use as prosthetics. Chinese women used to bind their feet to prevent further growth. The painful custom became popular as a means to display social status and was also a symbol of beauty in Chinese culture. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, August 27, 1896, is the shortest war in recorded history. The war, which was between the United Kingdom and the Zanzibar Sultanate, lasted only 38 minutes. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was never actually straight to begin with, and the design was flawed from the beginning. The foundation, set weak on an unstable soil, began to sink when they started on the second floor. Researchers believe that the Guanajuato mummy's terrible expressions are the result of the victims being buried alive. Former North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il was said to be a great lover of music. He composed 6 operas while he was in office. Klerksdorp spheres are strange 3-billion-year-old rocks that have been dug up near Ootowestel in South Africa. Up to now, no one has been able to fully explain the markings on their sides. The great Omaha Indian chief Blackbird was said to have loved his horse so much that he was buried sitting on top of it. Before there were alarm clocks, there were knockers up, who were hired to shoot dried peas from a blowgun at people's windows in order to wake them up in the morning. President Ronald Reagan was also a prolific lifeguard who saved 77 people from drowning. Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin, a Russian mystic, reportedly survived being poisoned, shot, and stabbed numerous times before he was finally drowned in the Volga River. Winston Churchill typically smoked between 8 and 10 cigars per day. During the Great Depression, people often made clothes out of flour sacks. Distributors would make their sacks more colorful to help people remain at least somewhat fashionable. The largest bird ever to exist had a wingspan of almost 20 feet. It lived 60 million years ago. Like many ancient royalty, King Tut's parents were related. According to DNA taken from his mummified body, his parents were actually brother and sister. The use of the word, hooker, is a term for a prostitute originated with Civil War General Joseph Hooker, who brought prostitutes along on campaigns for his men. While in power, Pope Gregory IX declared that cats were to be associated with devil worship and had them exterminated. He issued the papal bull, Vox in Rama, which is the first official church document that condemns the black cat as an incarnation of Satan, and consequently it was the death warrant for the animal. Some believed that the disappearance of those cats helped rats spread the bubonic plague or Black Death that killed millions of people in the 1300s. In 1929, 2 Princeton researchers claimed they have turned a living cat into a telephone. Adolf Hitler and his Nazi army relied on drugs to fight through World War II. King Henry VII had attendants specifically to help him go to the bathroom. The use of forks was once considered sacrilegious. Turkeys were once worshipped like gods. While the turkey is currently America's favorite part of the Thanksgiving meal, in 300 BC, these big birds were heralded by the Mayan people as vessels of the gods and were honored as such, so much so that they were domesticated to have roles in religious rites. They were symbols of power and prestige and can be found everywhere in Maya iconography and archaeology. Photos of Victorian women who never cut their hair, 1860. In the Victorian era, the woman's hair was considered an important part of her appearance and it marked her status and her femininity. Women in that era were often expected to grow their hair to great lengths, and it was common knowledge that a woman's crowning glory was her hair. Cléo de Merode, 1875, 1966, French dancer circa 1903. Miss N. Portrait of Evelyn Nesbit by Gertrude Casebier, 1903. People used to lock up their tea. You might think people love tea today, but the lengths they went to in Stuart and Georgian Britain was a bit bonkers. Back then, tea was imported from China and therefore very expensive, and only the rich could afford it. It was so expensive, in fact, that special tea boxes were made with locks on them, so no one could steal your tea. It was always kept where the mistress of the house could see it, which is why tea making because such an occasion. You wouldn't trust your servants to make you a cuppa. Would you lock up your Yorkshire gold tea bags today? Britain once banned Christmas. Between 1644 and 1660, Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell, a sort of unelected prime minister, banned the celebration of Christmas. Cromwell was a Puritan, a sort of very strict Christian who believed that fun things like dancing, music and even makeup were sinful and upset God. Unsurprisingly, this wasn't very popular, and there were even riots over it. The English might not have liked it, but the Scots weren't as bothered. In Scotland there was no Christmas celebration from 1640 until .1958. Well, it wasn't a public holiday anyway. That means your great-granddad might have had to go to work on Christmas. And a Roman emperor once declared a war on the sea. According to the stories, Emperor Caligula, who was known to be a bit of a hothead, was returning home from a failed invasion of Britain, and desperate to have a war with something. It would be embarrassing to go home empty-handed, right? Well, Caligula decided to declare war on the nearest thing he could find, Neptune, god of the sea. He ordered his men to whip the waves and collect shells as proof of victory. Historians aren't 100% sure if this story is true, but the fact that people believed in shows what an oddball Caligula was. Napoleon wasn't that short. If you know one thing about Napoleon, you know that he was short. Except he wasn't. He was actually 5 feet 6, which was the average height for men of the time. He was probably made fun of as little in propaganda pictures by his enemies, to make him seem less powerful, but Napoleon himself was no shorter than most men. He also liked to surround himself with very tall soldiers, which probably made him look smaller too. Paul Revere never actually shouted, "The British are coming." While everyone knows the story of Revere's famous ride in which he was said to have warned colonial militia of the approaching enemy by yelling, "The British are coming." This is actually false. The operation was meant to be quiet and stealthy, since British troops were hiding out in the Massachusetts countryside. Also, colonial Americans still considered themselves to be British. Charlie Chaplin grew up in extreme poverty in South London, before moving to America at 19 and becoming a famous and beloved actor and director, not least for his Little Tramp character. In 1921, he arrived back in England after a 9-year absence to publicize his new film, The Kid, and was overwhelmed to find himself greeted by thousands of adoring fans just a few miles away from the streets of his childhood. Chaplin eventually managed to get up to his room at the Ritz Hotel, where he leaned out of the window and threw carnations down to the crowd.